Welcome to the Infinite Dance. I'm your host, Carrie Aretta. Thank you so much for being here. To everybody that is new to the podcast, or if you've been with me now for these past couple of months, I so appreciate you being here. In today's episode, I am going to talk about stalking entities, discarnate souls, and miasms. And before I get into the specifics, and of course, stories, because I love a good story on these topics, I wanted to touch on the fact that the topics I'm choosing lately are really related to the times we're in right now. We are going through a lot of newness and hashtag new earth, really seeing things differently, going through a lot of generational healing, a lot of unraveling of past behaviors that absolutely do not serve in any way, shape, or form anymore. So, what I'm doing with these topics that I'm bringing up is to address that time between noticing, noticing that something needs to change, and the time in between of getting to a new way of living, a new way of seeing, a new way of being. And that journey can involve a lot. There's a lot of stress, there's a lot of pain that can come up mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. So these different elements that come in and knowing what's happening will just give you more information and more ease. That's the goal. A little more ease during this. Now, any kind of long-term healing, unraveling, it's going to be painful. It's just going to be painful. I don't know what else to say. It's we don't know how to interact with ourselves or each other or the world. And so it's it's just going to be a little bit difficult to incorporate all that and integrate it all and not and I don't want to sugarcoat it, but I also don't want to be like, okay, it's the worst thing ever. It's going to be good, having a little bit of um, acknowledgement of past traumas or pains or situations for a moment and working through it. That's a short time compared to a lifetime of having that still attached, still defining your daily life. So that's why I'm going into this and going into these tougher topics because it's something that we really need to bring out in the open. We really need to talk about it more as a culture, as a society, as neighbors, as family members, and just know that we're all going through something and we've all gone through something and we need to hold space for it. It's so very, very important that we hold space for our our past and where we are at in our journey right now. So with stalking entities, let's start with the stalking entities. So stalking entities are an entity that's obviously not in a body anymore. So it's a soul that we can have get attached to us. Maybe if we're at the grocery store or um, out in public somewhere. So you're around other beings, usually other people, and maybe you've just had a crap day or you're feeling sad about something or you just had a cry and you're still kind of raw, but you needed to go get something at the store. And the stalking entity then can find that alignment in energy and attach. Okay. it's not necessarily personal. A stalking entity is not going to have a personal connection to you necessarily. It's more of the energy that you're carrying at that moment. Um, and a stalking entity doesn't carry any programs. So I have found, and I have found clients, when they tell me of their tales with a stalking entity, it feels like either somebody's kind of watching you, or you might have a dream or almost a nightmare or uncomfortable dream. It doesn't necessarily have to be a nightmare that you're just like, ew, I don't want you in my car. I don't want you in my home. Get out of my house, right? If you've ever had those dreams and you're trying to get somebody out of your house, you probably have a stalking entity hanging around you. And they can be aligned to light or dark, and they just will exacerbate something you already have currently going on. So, say you're dealing with a sore neck. Maybe you got in a a car accident, maybe even just a little bumper, but it was enough to give you whiplash, and you're dealing with some neck pain, and it kind of started to go away, and then it started to come back again. They can just exacerbate that. So they're just kind of they're just irritating overall. Um, so when our vibrations are lowered, either by physical or emotional pain or even a substance, so this is very important. Um, when you alter your mind and you alter your state of being as it naturally is, this can change your frequency. And anytime you change your frequency changes, you have the ability to pick up on or attract that same frequency. Okay. And a lot of people, I know this is kind of a sidebar. And I understand I take CBD and I take a full spectrum. But a lot of times people are like, oh, but it's a plant, if they smoke pot. And I'm like, well, sure, it's a plant, but it's still altering you. And so depending on where you're at that day, you could, be in a lot of pain or just didn't have a great day. So just keep that in mind. I'm not saying don't smoke pot. That's something you choose to do, or have a couple of drinks, but just know it changes your frequency. Okay. So when we change our frequency, and a lot of times when our mind is altered, it can lower. So you could be at a higher frequency, you have a couple drinks, or smoke, or alter your mind in some way, shape, or form, and it lowers it. Okay. And of course, this can all be temporary. It doesn't have to be every time or all the time. But just to keep in mind, it's just to keep in mind. It's not saying you shouldn't do this or that. Okay. Of course, everything in moderation. So here is my stalking entity tale. So this is one of the ways I knew I had a stalking entity. I woke up from a dream one morning a couple of years back, and I was dreaming of this like blonde-haired man. He was young, probably early 20s maybe. I was in my car in like this parking lot with a lot of other cars, but it wasn't like I wasn't at a store or anything. But there was a lot of other vehicles around me, including like there was trucks, like long haul trucks, kinds of things, and big rigs. And I was in the front seat, and I was in the passenger side of my car. And he came to that window of my passenger side, and I remember looking at him, and I immediately pushed the lock down. And it was like one of those old locks to an older vehicle where it kind of would pop up. So if it's up, it meant it was, able to be open. And if you push it down, it locked it. So I immediately pushed it down so that he couldn't come in. And I remember just thinking, I don't want you here. And he looked like a person. He didn't look strange or, like a monster or anything. He just looked like a regular person, but I didn't want him in my vehicle. And there was another part where it's like that car turned into this big rig, but it was almost like my living space. And I was trying to like almost put down a shade a bit in one part of it to separate it out. And again, just trying to get some space and get away and just feeling irritated and like, no, you're not, definitely not coming in here. And so then I, of course, cleared it. But then I was like, okay, where did that come from? And it's not necessarily so important to know where a stalking entity comes from because, again, it's matching a vibration of where you're at the time. It's not personal. But I was curious. And so I immediately got shown when I was in meditation, clearing and asking about this. I was in a parking lot in the neighborhood I was in to the Target, and this particular shopping center was always busy. There was always so many people walking or driving around this shopping center, and there was like a grocery store, a large grocery store um, called King Supers, and like an Ace Hardware, a couple places to eat, a bank. Um, and so I was in my Lexus at the time. I had this older Lexus and named Marty. And I was going to get in the car and I remember seeing this couple and they were kind of walking down the middle of the where you park, the aisle that you would park your car. So there wasn't necessarily a parking or a walking like path, or sometimes there's like a sidewalk between where you park cars. There wasn't that. And if there was, they were just walking down the middle of the aisle. And I was like, okay, whatever. I went and got my bags and put them in my car. And I remember looking out the back, and I mentioned that it's an older car, an older Lexus, because the windows were large and it wasn't like I had any obstruction. It was a four-door sedan, but it's not like I had any obstruction looking out. So I could really see where I was going. And again, very busy shopping center. So I was like looking over my shoulders, a million times, right and left, just to make sure. And I knew this couple was walking because they had started to walk down the aisle. So they were a bit a ways away from my car. They weren't at my car, so I go to slowly inch out to let them know, okay, I'm trying to move my vehicle, and they just kept in the middle of the aisle. And I thought weird because usually if you see a car that's about to move, you either go, okay, I'm going to stop and let them do their thing, or I'm just going to move out of the way, move to one side. Um, because again, it's kind of where you would think of just of more cars being, yes, people. And again, usually when you're walking to your car, you try to stay to maybe the side your car is on or kind of hug the cars because there might be a vehicle driving down. And so they didn't budge, so I just inched a little bit more, but still I'm not moving fast or um, going anywhere because they're right there. And so, I'm like, okay, well, they'll walk by and they'll be gone soon. So for some reason, even though I was going so slow, tiptoeing, really making sure and, looking out for basically them, they got it and they kind of scooted over to one side and they stopped at one point. And I thought, okay. So then that gave me kind of space to move out. So I did. And they looked at my car and they started to run after my car. And I was like, what is wrong with these people? And then I thought they had like big gulp cups. And I thought, well, I don't know. Are they drunk? I mean, do they have liquor in there? But, is it not just soda or something? I mean, you're thinking, why is somebody chasing after my car when I'm, going slow? And what are you going to do chasing after my car in broad daylight in a busy parking lot? Strange. So, anyways, that story is to let you know that's where I picked up the stalking entity. Again, they do not run programs. The energy just matches. They are irritating and increase something that you already have going on. So they're not causing anything. So any physical ailment or even some not great story you're telling yourself that you're dealing with, they would come in and be irritating or more irritating around all of that. And again, doing a simple clearing, they're in the energetic matrix. They're not necessarily in a chakra, okay? Because that would be more of a program and would come from my next topic, a discarnate soul. So a discarnate soul or a non-embodied soul is another attachment that can happen. And this one is more personal. This is going to be some soul that you either knew of, or somehow needed to help you with something. So, for example, say you had a grandparent that you weren't super close to, you knew them, but maybe they were close to mom. And when they passed, they didn't know they were passing, heart attack or an accident. And they knew that you were going to go through something. They stuck around, and they stuck around to you because there was an alignment, again, of energy. So, alignment of energy, this is how this one happens too, but more personal. You can carry a discarnate soul over from a past life, or they can attach in present life. Okay, so you can have a soul that's non embodied that you were born into this life with. And, that can cause more and more chaos the more lifetimes that you have that soul attached, because you've got a soul attached that's not you, and they're not able to go on to do their path and purpose and their soul business. So it just, even if it's a kindness or a helping, souls a lot of times, especially ones we know, think they're going to help us in some way, shape, or form. But it can ultimately cause more chaos than harmony. When a soul passes and it doesn't go on to higher realms, it stays either at our dimension, the third dimension, or at fourth dimension. So the difference between third dimension and fourth dimension, of course, third is here, Earth, what we're doing now. Um, the fourth dimension is going to be more of what we term of, seeing ghosts. Um, we call it the smog belt in spiritual circles, because the fifth dimension is the Akashic dimension. So that's all our past life records and our soul's history. It's just kind of this space where there's just a little bit of an in between this and getting to that next state of being, with the fourth dimension. So again, bit of a smog belt, ghost and paranormal activity a lot hangs out in that dimension. That being said, the third dimension, if a discarnate soul that's attached to you is attached in our dimension, in the third dimension, they can make something move, make a light flick, something physical that's going on that's tangible. Now, the fourth dimension, again, you might feel more goosebumps, or the full body chills, if that soul is around or doing something. It can usually not be as intense if they're at fourth dimension for you in third dimension than a soul that's attached that's in third dimension. Because again, they're trying to figure stuff out as a soul without a body on earth, and it's just, a soul's not meant to be on earth, not in a body. That's just not supposed to it happen. It doesn't carry the density, right? So it's kind of always looking for that density, and that's why a soul a lot of times will attach to a person or a place, because it needs that solid mass to be here and to function here. Again, many times a soul will pass on and attach because it thinks it's going to help. Oh, you know, someone's going to go through a hard time or they're going to feel a sense of pain, and because that soul felt a similar pain, right? Then they attach to you. A discarnate soul usually hangs around when they have passed quickly and without knowing. So, possibly by a car accident or some other kind of accident, a heart attack, anything where it wasn't expected. And they aren't sure what happened. Maybe they feel like they had more business to do here. So they'll stick around. And again, they'll find something that's familiar, a person or a place, an energy that's in alignment. And here's the thing, a discarnate soul holds more weight than a stalking entity because it is going to run a program to be here. And that program usually has a lower frequency element attached to it. So it's something that it's feeding off that lower vibration again because they can feel that a little bit more to attach. So let's go into an example of what a discarnate soul looks like attached, and why it happens and an element that might come from it. So let's say a client, I'm doing this totally off the cuff. This is not an actual client story, although that will be a part of the podcast soon. This is just something I made up. But let's say a client comes in and this client says, I've been having hip pain and about, for the last 2 years, and it's gotten more intense lately. I've been to massage therapists, chiropractors, the doctor. I've, seen people for it. I feel like there's something more going on, and something more on an energetic level. And when I start to get into, okay, do you think of anybody in particular? Does anyone come to mind when you think of this pain or a situation? And a lot of times, there will be a person that they think of. And this particular client then said that her husband had passed away of a heart attack 2 years prior. And so I start to go into, okay, this is a discarnate soul that we're looking into, and the energetic nature that's attached to why it happened between them is disappointment. He's sad that he left, right? He's sad that he had this heart attack and left her, and she had felt some disappointment in herself with not fulfilling all of her passions in life. In fact, at one time she used to paint and she really enjoyed painting, and she would paint in watercolors and acrylics, and she really found so much connection to self and connection in a community. And that's another side of your soul when you create. And so she felt a bit of disappointment that she wasn't still doing that and didn't continue doing that. Life got in the way, family, work, etc. So and it's hanging out in her chakra too, which is right where the hip would be, one of the areas. So which also hosts chakra 2, passions and creativity. A lot of times our connection to our spouses too, generational healing and whatnot. So there's an example of a discarnate soul being attached and what it looks like, how it manifests physically, how that alignment happens energetically. And again, you know, her husband and her had a good relationship. There wasn't a negativity between them necessarily that would uh, make him, you know, it wasn't a negative experience. It was, you know, something positive, but because he wasn't on his path and purpose, his soul's path and purpose, you know, wasn't to be here, not in a body. Okay, so then it was chaotic, it wasn't in harmony because that wasn't what it should be. So then I ask for that soul to go on. And I've had people say in the past too, oh, but if you release them, will I still be able to feel close? Yes, 100%. It will just be a clearer connection because you won't have that energetic nature that's not serving anybody anymore, keeping you attached. So you'll have a chance to interact with them without the hip pain, okay, without the disappointment hanging around. Because let's go ahead and clear that out. Let's take the steps to ask for that to clear from the chakras, and then all the things that then the client would do to continue to release that energy, but that connection would still be there. You'll still be able to have that connection with that passed on loved one. Um, and that's what I term a discarnate soul a lot with clients, or when I'm talking, here's a passed on loved one. Um, and it's just so interesting how those relationships and interactions happen even after somebody passes. So that's an example of discarnate soul. Again, runs a program. Usually there always is some kind of a personal connection to it. And even if it's a good interaction and was a good interaction in life, it's not something we necessarily want moving forward for us or the soul that's passed on. So the last one I'd like to talk about is called a miasm, and I call this a miasm. Um, there can be other teachings that call a miasm something a little different. This is, though, something I call a miasm and how I see it energetically when I'm clearing, and I've cleared this for clients and for myself too. So miasm, in this sense, Akashic sense, is a collective area of mass trauma or abuse or something terrifying that happened to a group of people, and it hangs out in an area, okay? So an area or land. Now it's interesting because the definition, if you look up miasm, it's like medically speaking, um, you know, an area of three different um, ailments. And I was like, oh, I mean, it's just kind of interesting, right? I always like to know like a technical term for something too. Um, and another part of the definition was an influence or an atmosphere that tends to deplete or corrupt. It obscures, or it's like a fog. And I'm like, well, kind of does look like a fog. You know, for me, a miasm, energetically, when I pick it up, it's a bit of a fog. And, you know, obscuring what could actually be or what's underneath. Because a lot of times, especially if you are an empath or seer, you feel this a lot first, especially if it's around your home or business, you know, somewhere where you're trying to do other things. I'm, you know, having a birthday, or I'm having um, general business goings on, or, um, you know, just day to day things, breakfast. So you're not really thinking there's going to be some energetic mass that's weighing the area down. The group of people can be either related by birth or geographic area. And again, they've passed by some kind of collective trauma that was an accident, like let's say a fire, or think of all this happens a lot, and this will be a part of my example and story on Miasm, the native tribes and lands, and how those were all the trauma and fear and unjust and pure. I'm hearing evil that didn't need to happen at all. But that's the kind of energy that would, or that's the kind of goings on that would create then a group energy, a miasm of severe trauma. So my personal story does involve the Ute tribes from southern Colorado. That's where I was living, and I interacted with the souls, these certain souls, so passed on ones. I happened to live in a cul-de-sac, and I was living in a home that I had purchased um, that was a newer build. So I think the home was like 5 years old. It had a large backyard and it butted up to a little creek, and then there was a walking path. And I would walk along the path all the time. And there was one certain area when I was in the house, if I kind of looked out to the left, and I couldn't always necessarily see it from the house, but energetically it felt off. I really didn't like it. I didn't want to go that way. Okay. A ton. But it felt very depressing. It felt very sad. It, pure horror and torture is what I have gotten when I started to look into releasing the energy. Um, it just felt heavier out there. And even one time, my cat at the time, Pele, had like gotten oddly stuck in the creek water. It wasn't always like rushing or like a ton. Some little areas it was like just a trickle, So it was just kind of mainly a little bit wet. There was some rocks and dirt, and so it wasn't like deep water. And she kind of got stuck in that little area. It was kind of odd. But there was an overall sadness at the time that I couldn't quite put my finger on, and the whole area for me um, had a bit of sadness to it, and I couldn't, quite put my finger on it at first, and then I started to, um, spend more time in certain areas, spend more time in quiet in areas. I would visit a lot of the hot springs in the area, so I had some time to be like outside in nature. And then I remember, I don't know if it was a gal I worked with or I can't even remember, but I remember her, but I do vividly remember her saying, if you ever leave the area, make sure and take a little bit of the dirt with you, because there's a curse set on the land. And I'm like, yeah, most definitely a curse has been set. And, uh, it's one of those things where it's like you felt that heaviness, and it just felt so bad. And I felt not great being there. And even when I first got there, I knew I wasn't going to be there long term. And, this is not to say that it's a bad area. This is just my personal experience there. And everybody's going to have different experiences in different areas. And, I had no ties to the area. So there wasn't any family or, I didn't have any kind of ties to the areas. Everything was very new. So I'm just picking up on, somebody who doesn't have anything else going on from the area, but the sadness and the torture and the terror that these Ute tribes had experienced under colonization. And it's so heavy. It's so very heavy. Um, I have since petitioned for clearing of that area of the miasm, of having those stuck souls go on to their soul's path and purpose to higher realms. Um, and of course, asking guides and my guides, and is this something that's wanted? And especially souls that have gone through such torture, it's like continued torture, how awful. And it just will feel sad, bad. So miasm area, an area where this miasm, sometimes it might feel even like 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 you're walking through plasma or something, right? But it feels icky. Um, so actually physically going through it, and this is why too. When souls are stuck and they've gone through something so terrible, um, uh, I I feel not only terrible for what they've gone through, but their continued um, pain. And I, on a side note, love a good haunting or ghost story, but and miasm is more extreme. Not every soul that's disembodied will have this, but again, the miasm has the pain and the terror and the torture and the trauma attached to it. So it's just gonna weigh and be sad. So we always want those souls to not be in pain anymore, um, and to be able to experience what their soul is meant to do. Um, but that's the story for miasms then. And so getting into ghosts or haunting. So I was saying I do enjoy a good tale of haunting or ghost stories. I was listening to a podcast I enjoy called Morbid, and they were talking about haunted roads, or what did they call them? Fucked up roads or something like that. I can't remember, but I love tales like that. I always feel like at the end though that of hearing like a story like this, like I really want to be able to like talk to that soul and see if they want to go up to astral realms, or you know not be stuck here, because I'm like, are they just like you know going up to a car on the road and getting in the car, or whatever they're doing, because they're like, I don't know what to do with myself, I'm stuck. And so I just want to say, do you want to not be stuck? Do you want to, you know, do you want help? Um, so, but that's just me, and I know that all the ghost stories and the hauntings that people areas hold, you know. But I always think, does that soul not want to be here anymore? Do they want to actually, most likely, um, be in higher realms and not here on earth, not in a body? A soul isn't meant to be on earth without a body. They're just not. So that's stalking entities, discarnate souls, and miasms. Um, if you have any questions about your own personal journey with any of these, um, you're welcome to reach out to me on my website at ancientbodyworks.co, where you can have a private session. Um, Listener support is always welcome. There's a button at the bottom of most places where you would listen to podcasts. Or I also have a Patreon, theinfinitedance.com, or patreon.com/theinfinitedance. You can find me on Twitter at Infinite Dance and then the number 8. I'm on Facebook too. The Infinite Dance is a private group. I'd love to have you. I like to keep it private so that we can kind of really have a nice safe space to share our stories with each other. I am on Instagram. I am on Instagram right now under my umbrella business, Ancient Bodyworks. But I'd love to have you there. And the more we know of all of this, I believe the more power we have to um, interact with in our journey, um, coming from heart space, coming from heart space. So, and whether a soul is in a body or out of body, I'm always wanting to know that they are where they need to be. That's just something very important to me, on in my time on earth. So I will look forward to being here with all of you next week. Please tune in every Tuesday at 8 a.m. I do put a new episode out. And like I said, I am going to start um, doing um, listener and or client stories. So if you have a story about souls, your soul business that you would like to share, you could send me an email at carrielinarada@gmail.com. And if you want your name involved or not, I can say anonymous, but I would love to have your stories. Yeah. So keep peeling back the layers and keep asking yourselves and others, may I have this dance?